And we are live, I think. Yes, we are live. The red button is on. Yes, should it be green? I don't know. Welcome everyone to our webinar on how to scale your PLG strategy with an account-centric approach. We're going to leave a minute or two for people to keep trickling in. I see the numbers ticking up and up. As a reminder, you can turn off the bell if you don't want to hear that boop sound. So I'm going to do that myself. Because that can get a little annoying throughout the presentation. Say hi in the chat. Tell us where you're from. Feel free to ask questions in the questions tab throughout the presentation, conversation, and we'll take some throughout the actual flow of the thing, and then we'll also leave some room for questions at the end. Welcome from Boise. Welcome from sunny LA. Nice to see all the diversity. Oh, Sweden. That's nice. Yeah, I'm just fascinated by where everyone's coming in from. Welcome, welcome. Do we want to do kind of like an icebreaker question as we wait one more minute?
Yeah, we definitely can.
Yeah.
I am interested on Elena's take on this. I was doing a podcast yesterday with Intercom, and one of the questions that they brought up was if we were seeing some kind of significant change in go-to-market motions towards PLG in the market, or if it seemed like it was maybe more localized, like kind of a Bay Area or like big tech city kind of thing that was happening. So I'm curious to hear, Elena, from your standpoint, are you seeing like some more, I guess, like legacy enterprise companies trying to, dabble around with PLG, or do you see more kind of the emergence of these PLG companies that have kind of been behind the scenes for some time and now really coming to the forefront of the scene?
I feel like in Silicon Valley, it's become a norm. If you're going to start a company, or if you have a company based out of Silicon Valley, it has to be PLG. I do actually see a lot of it happening everywhere else, especially in Europe. To me, that's like the next big market that is turning to PLG, and a lot of enterprise companies are realizing that they may be disrupted by a company that has a PLG go-to-market or PLG growth model. So I starting to see it across the board, but I'm also worried it's one of those buzz terms that everybody's saying, but not a lot of people actually understand what it means. Very similar like growth teams. Oh my God, everybody needs to have a growth team. What does it actually mean? Nobody knows. So I'm still a little bit skeptical as to actual adoption of it, because it's becoming too hyped almost.
Yeah, I think it'll be a real bubble when we start seeing companies buying the .plg domain.
Oh.
I'm still waiting to see the first one. I haven't yet, but that to me will be a great sign.
Yeah. Shows over at .io. It's .plg now.
Yeah, Thomas Tongus wrote a really cool blog article on this that we could send in the chat, but he kind of analyzed the distribution over time of companies with different TLDs. So it's interesting to see kind of when we hit the peak.io, the peak.ly, the peak.ai, and kind of seeing how those correlate to different kind of years. It was a very cute analysis.
I actually love to ask our participants who are already here, do you consider your company either moving to PLG, considering PLG, or you're already at PLG? So if you can drop that into chat as well, that would be interesting to understand. Lots of considerations already running.
Yeah. Well, let's get going since we're already in that PLG space. I'd like to welcome everyone to meet, if they haven't already, Francis and Elena. Francis, the co-founder and CRO at MadKudu, has helped tons of companies do data-driven, smarter things to do better sales and, get the right people in the door. Elena just does all the things growth, I think, at lots of different companies, and is also currently the executive in residence at Reforge. I'm so excited to have you both here today to have a really great conversation about PLG and like what that actually means. And maybe that's the place to start. So I'm going to stop sharing the slides from my end, and then we can switch over to you, Francis.
Yeah, awesome. And thanks a ton for having us. We're excited to be here, and I'm thrilled to chat with Elena because I do respect her opinion a lot, and I think there's a lot that people out here can get from this conversation. So yeah, on the tactical stuff, I mean, we had the slide, but yeah, please do ask questions either directly in the chat, but ideally in the questions tab. It just makes it easier for us to kind of go back to those, and we'll try and address all relevant questions as we go. But yeah, I mean, the first question, and we were talking about this, like how PLG is hitting kind of peak right now. So there's always a question of what PLG means. I think, at least from MadKudu, we have a very monetization focused approach on how we look at PLG, just because of like how our business is structured. But Elena, I'd love to, I like how you kind of break it down, and maybe if you want to tell us what PLG can mean in a greater context, and narrowing into what we will be talking about more precisely today.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for having me as well. So for me, the core of every single business is your growth model. Your growth model consists of 3 attributes, which is your acquisition, how you're going to acquire customers, how you're going to activate, engage, and resurrect, aka retain customers, and then how are you going to monetize them. So you have 3 levers across your growth model to pull and figure out: acquisition, retention, and monetization. Product-led growth also can mean it's a product-led acquisition. It might be it's a product-led retention. It might be a product-led monetization. But I think you have to not just say, okay, I have a PLG growth model. When people say that to me, I don't know what that means. I need to understand, do you actually expect product-led acquisition through virality, through networks, through word of mouth? Or do you expect marketing-led acquisition? Maybe you expect sales-led acquisition. Very clearly identify where's the PLG in acquisition point. How much PLG plays into your retention strategy? Do you have self-serve activation in the product and engagement tactics, or do you rely on your success team to actually do it? So do you have sales-led retention? How do you identify your monetization? Is your monetization all self-serve, or it's a bottoms-up? We're going to talk about into enterprise sales funnel, so it's product-led, where it's product accountable for monetization, or is it sales-led at monetization completely? But to me, pulling that apart, when you're saying, okay, I'm PLG, are you PLG acquisition, PLG retention, PLG monetization, or all? It's a really important differentiation to make.
Francis, I think you're muted.
Oh yeah, my bad. So yeah, I was saying this is something that people get tripped up on, where they might sometimes kind of think that they have to be PLG in all 3, like monetization, acquisition, retention, when it's not necessarily the case. And it's typically you're better off understanding like where PLG can actually accelerate your go-to-market motion in one of those specific areas. But in any case today, like the core focus is going to be on monetization, and maybe even a little bit narrower. What we want to talk about is one of the challenges that we've seen companies run into when they've had a successful initial kind of PLG motion for monetization, and now they're really starting to scale a lot more that initial PLG success and how to actually get there. Obviously, I mean, we'll cover things from operational elements to more strategic elements, and always with this the beautiful trifecta of like looking at it through the lens of people, process, and tech, because you always want a combination of the 3 when you're looking at the operational component of it, and bearing in mind that at the end of the day, all of these, I mean, all the operations really are there to serve a strategy, and it's critical to remember what is the strategy that you're putting in place. And with that in mind, one of the things that I wanted to start with, because I feel it's, again, something that companies don't necessarily think about enough, especially when they're moving, again, from that initial kind of PLG success to trying to scale it, is really understanding how there might be different funnels or channels for monetization, right? So different types of companies and even potentially different types of people will want to go through the buyer's journey in a different way. And either they might want to go through it, to go through a different way, but also there might be a way of moving people down the funnel that is a better fit for them. And that's where, again, another thing where people sometimes get tripped up is they get initial success on a strong self-serve motion. So they're seeing a lot of people coming into the platform, getting value from the product, swiping their credit card. That's awesome. So that's kind of really the initial self-serve funnel. And then they start saying, okay, well, let's, start adding some salespeople in there. And so now they start having some transactional sales where essentially salespeople are helping people swipe their credit card, and they're seeing like some success there. There's all the questions of cannibalization and things like that. We'll talk about it afterwards. But then they start trying to go after bigger companies, and now they're going to go and try to get their first Fortune 5,000 company in. And now they're starting to hit these big roadblocks where actually getting people to buy through a self-serve monetization model in Fortune 5,000 is actually incredibly complicated, because they have a lot more requirements from a security standpoint, from a compliance standpoint. And that's where, we actually see that even from a PLG perspective, this kind of top-down approach still makes a lot of sense, where you want to educate the organization. You need a lot of sales enablement to actually get people past that initial hump where they're now ready to invest into actually trying the product. And now you can actually have the product drive them closer to the monetization. But there is a need for this kind of like top-down sales motion of making sure that you have some of the decision makers that are bought into the idea that the problem you're solving is actually relevant enough to invest time from their teams in evaluating the product. So that's where I think like companies struggle to realize that even though it's one product, they need to have different funnels of monetization based on who they're trying to close. And trying to push everyone down the exact same funnel is going to lead to catastrophe, because every company out there is different, and understanding what is the best journey for your different types of customers is really critical.
Yeah, and even more so, what if you don't break it down, because there's major aspects here that your users in the product are different than the buyers, especially if you continue going up the market. And we'll talk more about that. But if you look at it only from the lens of I have a self-serve sales that people are just transacting through my platform, and then I have a sales team that is selling my enterprise offering. If you don't clearly understand how those two interact and how self-serve escalates to sales, or which customer should be in self-serve versus sales, well, you start getting into a conflict of channels. I don't know how many of you that already have self-serve sales and then have sales have been in the situation or in a room where sales team is saying, I wasn't able to close my pipeline because self-serve cannibalized it. Or you have self-serve team that is saying, listen, you're just moving revenue back around. These customers should be self-serve. Why are you pushing them to sales? So those channels of conflict where they're pointing fingers at each other and saying, hey, I can't close, or I can't hit my target because of you. That's the major symptom that you actually are not breaking down, because that conflict should not exist. So I don't know if you've ever seen those types of conversations, but it's quite fascinating to see as an output whenever you don't differentiate those different paths.
Right. And one of the things that we run into when we build, let's say, lead score, is kind of this like predictive engine that's trying to route leads into one funnel or another. And this actually happened on one of our customers, where Elena is actually an advisor, where they're starting to ramp up their self-serve motion. And right now they have a really good enterprise motion. And the self-serve team is starting to say, well, the lead score doesn't work well. It predicts well the revenue that we're getting, but it doesn't predict all the conversions we're getting, because there's a bunch of self-serve people that are converting that are marked as a low score. And that's when you start realizing, but that's the whole point, right? The DNA of someone who's a good fit for sales and is going to generate a big deal is very different from the DNA of someone who's going to come in and swipe their credit card. And if we put it simply in like the people selling to developers, right? An enterprise sales motion to the IT division of an organization is very different from selling to the CTO of a 5-person startup who actually needs your product and is just going to swipe the credit card and move on. And so understanding that those two have like very different DNA and need to be catered to very differently is critical.
And even more so, whenever you actually try to solve for it by saying, hey, I know the perfect path for the customer and they are different, so it's not a singular journey for an account. I just need to get them into the right channel of sales, so you're actually deciding for them. That can lead to catastrophic results too, because the users that are coming to your platform versus the buyers that you actually want to push to a specific channels of sales are different. So Danielle, in terms of having an aggravated customer, yes, because you also saying, hey, you don't know how to operate within my product. I will show you where you need to go. I will push you where you need to go, which also creates just awful customer experience because they are unable to discover and get satisfaction and hit their aha moments on their own.
Right, which I think is a good segue to, I think, a slightly different take on the same idea that you have. And I would love to have you walk us through this, where I think it's similar but broken also by like who interacts with the product, how.
Yeah, so this is the view that I have. It's a product-centric view. It's an acquisition-centric view. If you think about every single customer that is coming in and signing up for your product, you have users, you have decision makers in there. How do you separate who you actually need to be growing and what's the right motion against them? So the way that I think about it, let's think about it on the team level, because we're talking about here mostly on B2B. You have all teams. All teams, there's some of it can be for personal hobby use. There's some maybe more of an exploration. They really might not be all up for your monetization motion, versus you starting to move into the relevant teams. And this is the first point and the first denominator that I always evaluate, that this is going to be subject to my monetization motion. Relevant teams are defined by commercial intent. Commercial intent can be defined by either it's a sign up that is happening from corporate domain, or they're selecting a use case within your onboarding that is of a commercial use. So you actually have to ask them what they're here to do. The next segment is ICP team. So ICP stands for Ideal Customer Profile. That's a very standard enterprise lingo. So you're saying out of commercial intent teams, how many of them are my ICP segment, which usually is just defined by a company size, because your sales team is not going to go for contractors, or they're not going to go for super small businesses, because there's never going to be enough ASP there to justify sales motion. So it's important to define what percentage of your relevant teams is actually ICP teams that can be subject for enterprise sales down the line. However, for me, it's important to optimize those ICP teams for hand raiser motion, because I want them to actually either find the buyer on their own, or I want us to help the teams find the buyer, and I want to optimize for hand raising, which is a sales form submission by an ICP relevant team in the product. The next portion is PQA teams. So again, we're continuously moving down in our criteria, and every single piece is a subset of the previous row. PQA teams is a product qualified accounts, product qualified account teams. It's an account. It's not a lead in my perspective, because most of the time leads, which are buyers, are not in your user base. So you have product qualified account. That doesn't necessarily mean that there's a lead in there. That means that you might need to do a lead and outbound strategy to actually find a buyer on that account. But it's defined by people that look like hand raisers, but they're not hand raisers at first, and then you can expand that definition if you can actually drive incremental benefit with enterprise outreach to those teams. And then the last one, from my perspective, is the ICP Fortune something team. So what that means is that it's not just coming from the company size that is interesting to an enterprise. It actually comes from a Fortune 100, 500, 1,000. It would be part of your key account strategy in that top-down approach. So if you didn't have any product usage and you had a sales outbound and field sales, that would be part of that list, and that would be the company that you would be going through that motion. If that's the case, forget self-serve, forget hand raiser. You need to give them a white glove service and make sure that you actually outbounding to them from the beginning, and you're setting them up for success right from the start. So they're actually worth spending a lot extra time from your perspective to make sure that their setup is perfect. To me, the biggest example here is AWS model. In AWS, even though everybody signs up for AWS as a developer, if you are in their target account list and you sign up for AWS, they're going to give you a white glove treatment and make sure that setup is perfect, because that will fundamentally guarantee a lead into their enterprise funnel, and it's going to be such a large quality and quantity of the the deal size that you can generate if the setup is correct, that it's just a path up to sales that is going to be with very little friction. But I cannot look at any product and say, okay, I have acquisition, which this is the motion that I'm going to apply to this acquisition number as a whole. I always break them down into these segments, because to me, it becomes extremely important to understand the right denominator for the right numerator monetization strategy that is going to be applicable. And not only that we can grow that denominator for all of the acquisition tactics, but that we're applying the right measurements and expectations to our user base.
Right. And I think, I mean, if there's one thing to take out of this, I think is that PLG success at scale requires a lot of nuance. Like, it cannot be a one size fits all. And like what, got you here won't necessarily get you there. And one of the examples that I wanted to very quickly kind of run everyone through is a short case study of something that we did with Envision. So the numbers are a little bit old because this is something that we presented with the Envision team back at the HubSpot Inbound conference. And it was kind of actually explaining what Elena was talking about, of how like all these there are different motions and different kind of channels and different ways to interact with different types of customers. But the quick kind of, background on Envision, for those who don't know, they're a product for designers, stellar growth with, all the way from freelancers that are working in the Philippines, helping people like redesign their websites for cheap, all the way to the best companies that everyone knows about, the Amazon, HBO, Airbnb, all that stuff. And so when we started working with them, what was really interesting is that they showed a really high level of maturity in their approach to their funnel, right? So they had optimized, let's say, the hell out of their hand raiser motion. So they had gone through multiple exercises of lead scoring, figuring out, okay, how do we make sure that we get as many hand raisers as possible, that when someone raises their hand, we're reaching out very, very quickly, and we try to maximize the conversion rate. And ultimately what we were seeing is that motion was starting to plateau. Like there wasn't really that much more that we could get out of the population. We were not going to force people to do more hand raising. I mean, just like you can drive more, product adoption, but there really wasn't that much more that we could do. And so then the next question was, well, there's a bunch of people using the product. Maybe we could get value from that. And so then kind of started the PQL motion and going into this like PQL optimization of saying, okay, like out of all the people that are using the product, which are the ones that are showing signs of a high enough engagement that would warrant us reaching out to them and seeing if there's value in actually selling them some of the more premium features of the product. And that worked well enough, but the conversion rate was obviously much lower than anything we were seeing on the MQL rate. It makes sense, right? The difference between someone raising their hand saying, I want to talk about upgrading to this like bigger tier versus you reaching out to someone saying, hey, you should upgrade to that tier. It's obviously going to be lower, but there's a much higher volume. So they were seeing some good results there. One of the challenges that they were seeing, though, is that this PQL motion was very well adapted to smaller organizations, but they were having a challenge going into the enterprise, right? They were having a challenge going after these like larger companies where they would still identify a couple PQLs and they would see, oh, well, there's like these 3 people at Facebook that are using the product like crazy. We're reaching out to them, but we're not able to generate enterprise opportunities. So that was kind of the point where they're starting to figure out that something is not working and they're not able to generate these bigger deals. And obviously the first thing that marketing does is checking if, sales is the culprit. And in this case, I have to say Envision has, one of the beefiest Salesforce instances I've seen out there, and like a really, really solid sales ops team. And sales in this case was not the culprit. Sales was actually reaching out very quickly to all the PQLs that were identified. They were using the right kind of messaging, and the feedback that we're giving to marketing was really interesting. They were saying like, these are definitely the right accounts. Like these are accounts that we want to talk to. We know we can close them. The people we talk to are indeed very engaged with the product and they're happy with it. They love it. But unfortunately, the account wasn't ready to convert. having 3 people from Facebook using your product doesn't mean you're ready to close an enterprise opportunity with Facebook and become like one of like the main provider of like design assets within Facebook. That's where I think what Elena was saying about this like kind of like product outbound motion needs to happen. You need to have that kind of like sales approach to go and like pitch it to the head of design and make sure that you kind of infiltrate the organization, that you're very clear on what are the challenges that the organization at an organizational level has, so that you optimize your white glove onboarding towards those challenges rather than let a few designers kind of play with the product with the hope that they will figure out how to address the bigger challenge.
Yeah, I would say that the first question that you need to understand is, how close of a relationship do you have between the user and the buyer? And a self-serve buyer is different than the enterprise buyer the more you move up in the segment. The most wrong assumption that we all make about our product, well, if they're purchasing self-serve or if they're already in product, I have an ability to sell them enterprise. And this is where the disconnect happens. And this is where you can deploy a ton of tactics towards your user base and generate zero pipeline fundamentally, even though you have incredible companies that are actually using your product. To me, it actually starts very tactically with looking at your hand raisers. One of the most important things that you can see is if your hand raisers are actual users or buyers, because this is already organic motion that is happening. And it's fascinating to actually start just look at the email domain of anybody who's submitting a sales form. Out of the people that are the company that is already using your product, is that email domain in your user base or is it not? And then most importantly, even if it's your user base, the email domain and the sales form submission exists in your user base, how long has it been around there? It's fascinating the trends to see of how those numbers look from company to company and how similar they are, where the product is very heavily positioned towards users. And as you start going up the segment of, let's say, 500 plus employees, how absolutely the same trends look of the composition of those hand raisers.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think it's a perfect segue into kind of the recommendation here, which is making sure that you look at the customer journey from a company level and not just from a lead level. And I think that's exactly what Elena is saying with looking at domain, right? When people come and request a demo, like one of the things that I know she's seen multiple times, and we'll talk about some of the companies that she either worked at or still advises that have seen this, where they get these demo requests from people that are not product users, but there is someone else from the organization that actually is a product user. And it's really critical to be able to link the two together, because otherwise it seems like you have these hand raisers kind of falling out of the sky, and you don't really know what to do, right? It's great, but at the same time, there's no predictability. How do I get more of these hand raisers if I don't even know what led them to hand raise in the first place? And that's why looking at the customer journey is so critical. And one of the challenges that I see out there is that a lot of folks, because they've grown a successful kind of self-serve product-led motion, live in this kind of linear approximation of the journey of saying, well, my journey is straightforward, right? People sign up, they activate the product, they get recurring value from the product, and then at some point they've gotten so much recurring value, they're wondering, well, maybe I could benefit from the premium value, or if you don't have a premium approach, well, I should keep on paying for the product because I'm getting value. The thing that generally you miss when you only look at this user perspective is that there's some people that actually don't go through that step-by-step journey, and you have a bunch of people who sign up and then automatically become a hand raiser or a customer. And also you have folks who, from one sign up are basically simply going to be inviting new users and creating that engagement at the account level. And at some point, one of the users they invite is going to be the one who signs up and does the hand raiser. So understanding the dynamics within the account is really critical. And so this is like one of the reasons why I was super excited to do this with Elena, because I mean, some of the companies you work with, if not all of them actually, are stellar in terms of growth and success so far. So I'd love to hear maybe like a couple examples of similar challenges and success that you've seen at some of these companies?
Yeah, I'll start with Miro. I had an opportunity to be there as an interim CMO for almost a year, and we was working with Suze, for at least their enterprise marketing team, to identify exactly this. And the story went as follows. So Miro is only invested into inbound sales teams. So Miro is an online whiteboard platform. They acquire users that need to brainstorm and ideate or create some UX design work, but it's users. And then it starts to escalate. It's extremely viral. A lot of people start collaborating on the platform, and that's eventually leads to a hand raiser, which is just somebody from that company submits a sales form to talk to sales. So it's already being product is used, and the reason that it's called hand raiser is like a company hand raises into your sales pipeline and say, hey, can we please close an enterprise deal? It's like a very organic pipeline creation out of your product. Well, we had some hand raisers. It was amazing. And we're like, okay, well, we need more. We're hiring more salespeople. We need to create more pipeline. Let's do more of what we're already doing right now. We feel like we're doing already marketing lifecycle, enterprise nurtures. Let's do more nurtures. Let's not just go after buyers, which is we identified as part of the onboarding. Let's just expand it to all. Let's personalize it across use cases, and we're going to generate more hand raisers. Now, remember that we increased the number of email sends by 10x, and we were coming to these revenue meetings. They're like, okay, hand raisers, hand raisers, hand raisers. Here they come, here they come. I know there's some lag, but they're about to get a spike up. And what we noticed is there's no movement to hand raisers for the next 3 months. And we're like scratching our heads. We're like, but we're sending more emails. We're communicating with our users more. Why isn't there more hand raising behavior that is happening? And that's when we pulled in the analytics team and said, okay, let's actually try to understand what is going on with our hand raisers. And we started looking at the numbers and composition of them. And the results were astounding. So first of all, that we found that, let's say, out of 100 hand raisers that are going to happen today, only 60% of them actually had an email domain that existed in our product user base. So 30% of them, even though the company was using it, the hand raiser was not part of the product users. So all of our email lifecycle would never touch those people. It would never get to those people. They were just not in our product, even though their company was using it. And out of the ones that were in product, majority of them were just a couple days old. So they just logged into or created an account to evaluate, to see like, what is this Miro thing, as opposed to actually being a user. So very few of them had actual boards that they created or collaborated on. And that was an eye-opening event for us, because we're like, okay, we're keep nurturing our user base, expecting that these buyers are going to be in there, but we actually, majority of them, 70 to 80% of them, are not in our product user base. Or if they are, they're already coming in with a high intent to evaluate. So our nurtures are never going to even hit them, because our nurtures really started after account was engaged, or user was engaged and activated. So these people, they would never get through activation motion. And that was a big aha moment for us. Like, listen, yes, in some segments, the buyer is there, and our efforts, our product efforts are very much fruitful. But in so many other cases, the buyers are not there. And we need a way to actually either influence the user to reach the buyer internally through a relationship that they have with them, or we need to find the buyer. But just our efforts against our product user base is not gonna be fruitful. The funny part about it, I thought at first, maybe this is just a data point. It's a data point and it's not a trend. And I went to Netlify, and I'm running their growth team as an interim as well. And Netlify is a web hosting platform, developer persona, different industry, different category, same software solution, but completely different offering not because Miro is in the productivity space. And we just finished our analysis on hand raisers there as well, and the results are exactly the same. 30% are completely not even in the user base, and the other half that are in the user base are just evaluators, and they just came in very recently. My mind just went blown, which means that this is a pattern at this point. This is a framework. If you go across marketers and product managers versus developers, if you have a product that is user-centric, these relationships hold. So you need to think very carefully about the strategies of how to actually generate this pipeline on top of your product. Just putting ads of contact sales or just sending emails of enterprise nurture to your user base may mean very minimal, may lead to very minimum diminishing returns from all of those initiatives.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think so. Like John in the chat was making a comment that of course like the demo requests convert at a much higher rate. And I think that the part that's interesting here is what we're saying is that those don't come typically out of nowhere. They like even though it might seem like they do, they're typically part of an account that has seen some engagement. Like another data point just to kind of pile up on this, but one of the big database providers that we work with, one of the things that they're seeing is that on their self-serve, they have something like 50% of their self-serve conversions that don't do anything between sign up and conversion. Literally, people sign up and convert instantly. And they're wondering, well, like, is it because they're doing a ton of research on the website and they're getting really, really educated as to why this provider is better than another? And then they sign up and they convert because they're already convinced. But when we actually look at it, what we're seeing is no, there's like a bunch of engagement that's happening ahead of time from other people within the account. And the person who's signing up and converting automatically is just like, that's kind of the buyer. So it's a different person, which I think relates to what Nadav was saying in the chat, where like running the enrichment on like, and that's one thing we'll cover. When you start looking at the roles of these different people, what you start identifying is that there are types of people that are going to be more buyers that kind of like swipe the credit card versus people that are more activators who actually are there to evaluate the product, get value from it, and they're then going to be championing within the organization. This is a tool that we should use, and hopefully inviting the buyer to come in and swipe the credit card, which I guess is kind of jumping into the next section of talking about how do you go, okay, we're saying it's important to understand that the customer journey in B2B, it's like business to business, we're selling to accounts, so we have to understand the account customer journey. Within the account, there are different personas, and each persona is going to have a kind of specific journey. An analogy that I love to use, because I am a bit of a nerd, not afraid to say it, is the Lord of the Rings. I love it because it's a fairly complex story. There's a lot of stuff happening. But at the end of the day, it is also incredibly straightforward, right? It's the story of the Fellowship of the Ring. There's a ring, you want to destroy it, and there's a bunch of people like working together to do that. What's really interesting is to see that even though it's just one story, there's a lot of different characters who do different things, and there's different kind of competing interests, right? Like Boromir wants to get the ring for himself, to bring it back, and like other people are really going to fully dedicate themselves to helping it. And even like the ring bearer has like at some point some questions of like, why don't I keep it for myself? Like, I love this like sense of power that I have of like having like salespeople pitch to me. Anyway, the whole thing there is like, it's a complex journey. And if you remove some part of it, the whole story breaks apart. And I think that's the beauty also of Lord of the Rings. Like, remove one character and the ring doesn't get destroyed. And I think like it's important to realize that B2B sales motions, as deals go bigger and bigger, gets that complicated. Like the procurement process, I would say, to me, procurement is more of the orcs, but that's kind of my opinion. But like having been in sales, but like they're gonna fight, like, and because they have a vested interest in making sure that things don't necessarily change, because it's in their interest to try and prevent that. So understanding kind of who these different protagonists are, who the champion is, and potentially the one that's really interesting to me, and at least in this analogy, is Gandalf, right? Because he's to some extent the one that starts everything, but also is absent from almost like an entire third of the story, and then comes as the savior at the very end. And if you're selling, like very often there's like a C-level or like a VP that has a very strong vested interest in changing the situation, but that person is going to be absent in the foreground, at least from most of the story, and they might come at the very end if it seems like this is moving forward to actually come and save the day. Anyway, enough was the analogy, and back into the numbers. One of the ways to look at it is we kind of look at job titles and plot them against two axes, and you look at what is the impact of having a given title in an account towards the likelihood of the account actually activating the product. So getting like this like first value. And on the flip side, the other axis is kind of like when we have this title, how likely is like the account to convert, or how likely is that person to actually swipe the credit card? And the long story short, what we typically find is that there's kind of like different groups of people that get easily identified. And what we see is that, there's this kind of like core user type of persona. There are going to be people that activate the product a lot. So if you have your activation events, you look at the people who actually do that within an account, you'll find that they have a strong propensity towards that. And then you look at your, let's say your self-serve or whatever way you track conversion, and you'll see that there are folks who actually either perform those events, again, in a self-serve motion, or actually are present when the deal is closed if you're doing more enterprise sales. And those are a very different DNA, and they tend to activate the product a lot less, which I think goes back to what Elena was saying. I mean, we could change like conversion propensity to hand raiser propensity. And we'll see there people are likely to hand raise, but not likely to activate the product. And understanding these two is critical, because from that, you then want to derive sets of very different kind of nurture campaigns, and even like thinking about how you drive people. And I think this is exactly what Elena was talking about. There are some cases where you want to talk to your buyer in a very different way. Like either it's like this kind of like sales-driven approach of, trying to give them an overview of the product, or, trying to tell them why their team would get value from using this product, versus for a core user, you're really trying to drive more adoption and getting them to like grow, the account usage, and potentially at some point swipe the credit card.
I would also add you might have been ever in a situation, I know I have, where a team goes into some sort of QBR or planning session, and they look at the total MQL number, so marketing qualified leads, and they view that as an input into the pipeline creation, and they say, we need more MQLs, we need more MQLs, we need more MQLs of good quality. They maybe look at the sources of MQL submissions, so they look at where the sales forms are actually being submitted on the website, but they never understand those user journeys and the relationships and all of the parties involved that led to that MQL submission. So what frequently ends up happening as a mistake is that they just push on marketing's team saying, hey, deliver more MQLs for us, where a lot of times through this user journey, the decision maker is actually user. They're in product, they're the one evaluating it, and they will corner the enterprise buyer to submit that final hand raiser MQL into the sales funnel. So only looking at it as an outcome, this is the pipeline, and not understanding all of the players in the game, depending on the segment, depending on the use case, and those relationships will really leave you short of being able to drive that predictable and sustainable outcome. And a lot of times, one of the beautiful trends that we're seeing in the space overall is that enterprise buyers used to make decisions top-down for the organizations. That was about 10 years ago. Then what we saw is that a lot of those decisions led to a very low utilizations of the platforms that they were purchasing. So there started to be a lot of turnover in the platforms that are actually started to get replaced by users displacing them on their own. So instead of using something that company decided, if something was a lot more prosumer-centric, consumer-centric, and it was a lot more pleasant to use, employees just started picking the platforms that they want to be engaged in, as opposed to being told what they need to be engaged in on the company level. And enterprise buyers, they want to see utilization of the platform. They want to see the money that they spent on actually working. So they started shifting to relying on users making some of those decisions, as opposed to doing evaluation cycles themselves. That's not present in every single industry, but that relationship is changing. Look in your industry and understand how much of that actually lands on the user versus a buyer, and when is the buyer actually gets involved, when is the buyer actually can be influenced by a user themselves. So all you need to do is to focus on the user as a sales agent and enable them with sales material, versus when do you actually need to help a user find the buyer, because relationship does not exist within an organization, and then you actually have a strategy like enterprise marketing outreach strategy to find the buyer. But not knowing that Lord of the Rings, all of the players and journeys can really tamper your ability to actually drive those MQLs that are going to be an output metric of all of these efforts.
Right, and I know to some extent you've already kind of answered it, but I think it's worth kind of just repeating it. I think like Trevor had a really good question of how do you increase the hand raiser rate for this kind of buyers. Let's say like was a typical example that, again, something that we see so often. You have 3 users within the account. like what's the right way to get the buyer to to show up and to be involved. And I like the idea that in this case, they're saying like the users aren't necessarily directly involved.
Yeah, I look at the buyer and to understand buyer persona, and I see, is there even use case for the buyer within my product? So let's take Dropbox. Dropbox, a lot of people, a lot of employees bring Dropbox into organizations just because they prefer to use it over some other Google storage or even Box. And then, is there value for a buyer in Dropbox? Well, yes. As a buyer, I also have files to store. Plus, I can get some admin privileges and have a peek into how easy it is to manage my team and my organization as a buyer, because I'm actually going to be using the product. So if the strategy is that the buyer is actually going to have some sort of usage, I would go very heavily find a buyer where they are already rotating. So it's not going to be in product potentially. So it's going to be somewhere else, and go a very heavy enterprise trial strategy. So give ability to a buyer to say, listen, we're just going to unlock enterprise offering for you for the next 30 to 60 days. Go deliver it to your team, or go try it yourself because there is an actual use case for you there. And then play take it away strategy. So instead of trying to upsell them, of promising rainbows and unicorns, if they actually buy into your product, say, hey, here's your 30, 60-day trial. Your team is already using it. You get this 30 to 60-day trial into our enterprise offering. And then at the end, we will yank it away and you will feel the pain and you'll actually want to continue it and upgrade to our enterprise offering. So that would be one use case. The other use case is that enterprise buyer is literally just a buyer. They're never going to be a user just because of the context of your product and what it solves. In that case, you need to create user pain to move into enterprise offering, because buyer will only make a decision if users tell them to do so. And users will only want to be on your enterprise offering if they have user features that they want in your enterprise plan. The biggest mistake here that you can make is to design your enterprise offering that is specifically focused on the buyer only, from security, from privacy, from some sort of admin perspective, and users could care less that they would be on an enterprise or not. Often it actually limits their ability to collaborate or to have more freedom, so they actually don't want to be an enterprise offering because it will start locking down the gates for them. So putting enterprise offering that actually is lucrative for users, where you have in-context discovery, you have features where users are feeling the pain and saying, I want that, let me figure out who is an organization is actually going to be the buyer, and I will pitch them on it because there's so much benefit of it to me. That's how you generate a predictable hand raiser. So really understand your use case for the buyers and go after it with the appropriate strategy.
Yeah, and I think that's, I mean, I want to double down on one of the points that you made. To me, like, this is one of the very good examples of the difference between Asana and Trello. Trello, I think one of the things I like talking to their growth team, like before their acquisition, one of the biggest way for them to generate these enterprise pipeline was security, saying like, hey, by the way, like if, one of the creators of a board leaves your company and you're not on the enterprise plan, you lose the board as you deprovision this account. So that's exactly what Elena said. It's catered to the buyer. Like only the buyer cares about making sure that we don't lose boards when we have like turnover within the organization, but the user is not going to go and fight necessarily for this. And I think that's where it didn't necessarily become as like massive of a success as Asana. What Asana has been doing really well when they started, getting companies to pay is they have all these trials within your account where you can actually like try this enterprise feature for like 60 days, and then you can try this other one. And it's very driven. It's kind of creating this habit from the user of like, oh, we've created like portfolio. And I also like how they cater to different job titles. Like on the PM side, they're going to have, oh, this is how you build like your epic boards and like how you have your stories relate to epics and like this whole kind of portfolio of projects that work together. And you want to start using them. And after 60 days, when they remove it from you, you realize, well, actually, this was like really helpful. Yeah, I might actually go and ask for more budget to pay for this. And I think that's where Asana has been able to build massive monetization on top of a huge user base, where Trello, I think, kind of struggled a bit more to really monetize their massive user base.
I also want to give an example of SurveyMonkey. I spent many years at SurveyMonkey, and our product was really focused on consumer, so on the user. So an individual user, not even the team collaboration around surveys, but individual users. So I'm really going back about 5 years ago. SurveyMonkey has done an incredible job on fixing this and working through these challenges. But when we so optimized the product for individual usage, our enterprise offering was specifically built only for enterprise buyers. Manage your billing, manage your data, own your data, privacy, and so on. So we released our enterprise offering. We put in the forecast a certain percentage of our user base, especially in the high enterprise accounts like Kaiser or Wells Fargo, are going to go and upgrade to enterprise because now we have enterprise offering. And we released it and we just fell flat on our face. We couldn't generate pipeline out of our user base because the buyer was never going to be the user, because the buyer in those organizations is a CISO, CTO, or whoever. They don't care about SurveyMonkey. They're not the ones that are going to be ever creating surveys. And our users were so optimized, the product was so optimized for individual usage that it became completely disjointed strategy. Users could care less about moving to enterprise. Enterprise buyers were like, SurveyMonkey, what? People are happy. Like, this is low on the priority list to solve. I don't have pain points. I don't have problems to be solved here. Let them be. Like, this is not my priority. And we couldn't make that happen until we actually started moving and developing some of the features to enterprise offering, which actually generated user interest in enterprise. It was a year or so that we're like, how do we make it happen? Contact sales CTAs, lifecycle everywhere. And it's like nothing was working. Even outbound into the accounts was not working. And until we actually took it back to the product strategy and revamp our thinking on pricing and packaging.
Yeah, it's a great point that there's like an element of product there and making sure there's a clear value there. I know we're running out of time, but there's like some really good questions, and maybe one that I wanted to pick up on that Elias asked, saying how, like, what enablement formats have you seen work in kind of this like post-COVID era?
I don't think from my perspective, there's a difference in the pre-COVID versus post-COVID era. To me, it's about what are the problems that you're going to solve with your enterprise offering for a user. So look at it from that angle. So it might be that they'll be able to achieve more. It might be that they'll be able to get more stuff done. I also think it's very important for you to identify in your user base who's the pioneer and who is more of a settler persona. So the differentiation here is the pioneers, they love bringing new products and ideas to the table. They're usually going to be the first account that is actually created in the company for your product. They thrive on the idea of challenging the norm and improving it. And then there are settlers, the people that are, they're not as pioneering in their mindset, but when the decision or they see the benefits, they will definitely adopt. But they're not going to necessarily put their neck on the line to talk about your product to another person. They're not going to be your main evangelizers that you can actually potentially segment as your power users. So focus your material on, like, what is the problems that you're trying to solve for them? Because if there's no problem to be solved for me as a user, why would I go and talk to somebody else about your product? And I need to also help me understand what problems I may help solve the buyer, so I come out on top, so I look like a hero, because that's going to hook into my core psychology of a pioneer to say, I'm going to go challenge the norm and solve the problem. So understand that there's a lot of really great qualitative interviews that can result in you answering that question, and then just test. I don't think there's a proven method of this works and this doesn't. A lot of companies are still figuring out, and I would just recommend doing as much experimentation here as possible.
Yeah, and user research. I think the part that is, I think the spray and pray is becoming harder than ever, just because there's so many companies or people like us right now doing a webinar. Like there's so many webinars out there that it's hard potentially to get people's attention. I do think where one of the areas where there has been a massive change is on getting in front of the buyers in the typical kind of field marketing, field sales events of, like, hosting a very expensive dinner to bring in like CMOs or whatever, like C-levels of different companies from your target accounts and a bunch of customers together. That is something that is not possible right now yet. And we've seen some companies be successful running kind of very small round tables, but what's challenging there is that you have to make sure that the content ahead of time looks good enough, that the attendees are great enough, that people are willing to yet book another Zoom meeting on their account for people that are already super busy. So I think that part, folks are still trying to figure it out, but it goes back to understanding also what is the content your users want to consume. I think that's the one thing that sometimes I find myself repeating a lot to marketers. It's not about your campaigns, it's about what the user want, like how they want to consume information. And if your users want to read long blog articles with like very like pieces of code and things like that so that they can tinker over it over the weekend, that's a much better way of doing it than trying to do webinars talking about like how like the security features are awesome. But it starts with this kind of like user interviews and understanding like where do your customers get their information from.
So this is your strategy to reach enterprise buyers then, right?
Yes. Hello, enterprise buyers, by the way.
Yeah, no, but that's true. And I actually seen even more successes of not necessarily focusing on those roundtables and bringing enterprise buying together, but deliver more value to them. Like show that you actually, this is not just a product, and this is more that you're going to advance the way that they can effectively conduct business with their customers, so they can coordinate and collaborate together internally. But a lot of it is, so much of it is a community play, so much of it is actually thought leadership play, but you need to do it on both sides. You need to understand the value that you will be able to give to users because the best way to generate that MQL and to generate the pipeline is a third-party validation through user. It's not you reaching enterprise buyer. It's the user reaching enterprise buyer through their own relationship. That's the best place where your close rates are going to be super high. So the more you can enable that, the more I would try at least see if you can make that motion work.
Makes sense. And I will address the question of who is Gollum in the case in the Lord of the Rings stories. Typically, I see Gollum as being the person who built the current in-house solution and doesn't want it to be taken away. And they're saying like, oh, whatever we bring is not going to be good enough. It's not going to do X, Y, and Z the way my tool does it. I know we're getting close to the top of the hour. There's still a lot of great questions, and I know we had some more content we wanted to cover, but I don't think we'll necessarily be able to. The good thing is we've covered a lot of this. We were talking about how, again, like days to hand raiser, different from user to account, and we'll make the slides available. I think just like, again, one of the takeaways that will be in the slides, I think Elena has some like great opinions on what are the like relevant metrics for companies to track in this PLG towards monetization. And then at MadKudu, there's a bunch of PLG resources again that we'll make available if you want to read more about that. If you want to reach out to us, please add Elena on LinkedIn, follow on Twitter, like and subscribe, hit the bell, the like button, all that good stuff. And on my front, yeah, I mean, either like I try to write as much as possible on madkudu.com, but also on LinkedIn and Twitter. And we'll have all of that in the follow-ups. Yeah, I don't know on the Clearbit side if there's anything you folks want to add, but I know for me it's been a blast, and I'm really happy that Elena was able to share some of her awesome knowledge.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Not that we have it all figured out. I think this is one of the most highly evolving spaces as well. So I see a lot of errors. I see a lot of successes. Hopefully in a year or so, we can come back to you with very solid frameworks and proven strategies of how to actually succeed here. But figure it out with us and share with us what your successes and failures as well.
Yeah, I love that idea. We should do this again in a year, and maybe we'll have some stronger opinions and stronger ideas. Thank you so much for joining us. This has been so great. It's been really particularly wonderful to dive into like the nuances of PLG, which I think really gets lost sometimes in the conversation, and that's been really helpful. So thank you. On the Clearbit side, we just released part 1 of a look at PLG companies. I'll put the link in the chat. And other than that, thanks for joining us. Reach out to Elena and Francis on LinkedIn and say hi.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.